There's something different about small towns in Alaska. The silence is heavier, the roads feel older, and when the snow comes, it doesn't just bury the land, it buries secrets. Tonight, I'm taking you deep into the cold, forgotten corners of the North, where things go missing in the dark, and not everything that disappears is found. These are 10 of the most disturbing true horror stories from Alaskan towns, so small, you won't find them on most maps. Before we dive in, hit that like button. It helps this story reach more horror lovers like you. And I mean it when I say this. Every viewer here is part of my horror family, so drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you're new, subscribe. Your support helps keep the darkness alive. Let's start. The delivery was supposed to be routine. One of those odd jobs I'd take when construction slowed down in winter, hauling equipment to out-of-the-way places where nobody else wanted to drive. The company said it was a generator for a hollow hamlet called Pescott, a name I'd never heard even though I'd grown up in western North Carolina. They gave me directions on a single page, printed years ago: state road, then a Forest Service road, then a gravel lane with no number. By the time I left Asheville, a cold drizzle had turned to sleet. Up past Burnsville, the ridges were already white. The farther I drove, the dimmer everything felt. Sun barely a pale smear behind clouds. Roads narrowed. Guardrails vanished. It stopped feeling like a highway, and more like a path someone had carved into the mountains 50 years ago and forgotten to maintain. When I finally reached the sign for Pescott, it wasn't much of a sign at all. Just a bent metal post with the name stamped crooked. No population number. The road dipped into a hollow crowded by black pines and bare poplars, branches heavy with ice. I slowed. My headlights caught the first building, a clapboard church leaning sideways, windows missing, door hanging open like a yawn. Every house I passed looked the same. Doors ajar, curtains frozen stiff with ice. A pickup truck sat half buried in snow against a telephone pole, no tracks leading to or from it. The whole place smelled faintly of wet metal and wood smoke gone cold. I parked the box truck near a one-room general store with peeling red paint. There should have been somebody waiting for the generator. Instead, nothing, just the slow hiss of sleet. Even the birds were quiet. I tried my radio. "Delivery for Pescott," I said. Static. "Anybody copy?" Nothing. I switched to the state channel. Still nothing. I walked. My boots crunched on crusted snow that had no other footprints. Each house I tried was unlocked, but empty. Furniture in place, food on counters gone moldy. One still had a wood stove faintly warm, as if someone had been there hours earlier, but no sign of anyone. Past the store was a payphone bolted to a crooked post. The glass around it had long since shattered. The receiver dangled, cord swaying in the wind. I picked it up, half expecting nothing. Dead line. I dropped it. I told myself I'd unload the generator and leave a note. The road back would only get worse if it kept snowing, but something about the place hooked into me. That feeling you get when you walk into a room and sense you're interrupting. I holed up in the cab of my truck as dark came down fast. The kind of mountain dark that eats your headlights. The sleet turned to hard snow. I tried the radio again. Static. Then at 9:03 exactly, I heard a phone ringing. It wasn't my cell. No service for miles. It wasn't the payphone either. I'd been staring at it through the windshield. This sound was farther off, somewhere beyond the last row of houses. 3 rings. Pause. 3 rings. Pause. I stepped out, snow squealing under my boots. The ringing stopped, only the hiss of snow and the smell of frozen wood smoke. I told myself it was echo, maybe ice cracking, maybe a generator turning over somewhere. But as I climbed back into the cab, I saw the tree line at the edge of town, dark against darker sky. Branches swayed though the wind had died. I couldn't prove it, but I felt it. Something watching. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound outside the truck felt magnified. Snow sliding off a roof, a door banging somewhere. Around 3 a.m., I woke to silence so heavy it pressed against the windows. No wind, no snow, just stillness. When light finally seeped into the hollow, it was colorless. My windshield was crusted with ice. I started the engine for heat and told myself I'd drop the generator at the store and leave. But I couldn't. The phone ringing the night before gnawed at me. I walked again, slower this time. Houses that had felt merely empty yesterday now felt staged like sets. A living room with an ashtray still full, a pair of boots by the door, a coffee mug frozen mid-sip. The air inside smelled like damp plaster and old tobacco. Near the back of one house, I found a landline phone on the wall, bright orange rotary dial. I lifted the receiver. Dead, but the cord was warm to the touch, as if current had run through it recently. I kept moving toward the sound I'd heard, deeper into the hollow where the road dwindled to a path. Snow here was untouched. No deer prints, no fallen branches, only my own tracks. Then at 9:03 again, it rang. Clearer now, not far. I followed, boots sinking into crust. The sound seemed to move, like it was always one house farther than I was. My breath came out in pale bursts, loud in my ears. At the edge of town, just before the trees closed in, stood a single outbuilding. Maybe a pump house, maybe a shed. Its door hung open, black inside. The ringing came from there. I stepped up, hand on the frame. Inside was nothing but a concrete floor and a payphone mounted crooked on the wall, receiver still in place. It rang once more and went silent. I picked it up. Nothing. Just my own breathing and a faint crackle like wind through dry leaves. I left it hanging and stepped back. That's when I saw the tracks, not in the snow, but on the inside of the door frame. Long dark smudges, like gloved hands gripping wood, fresh enough the frost hadn't settled on them yet. I turned toward the trees. They were utterly still. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I walked back to the truck without running, because running would have broken something in me. I drove out of Pescott as slow as I'd come in. My rearview mirror was nothing but falling snow. It's been 5 winters since that delivery. I never told the company what I found, or didn't find. They docked my pay for leaving the generator behind. I don't care. Some nights, especially when the wind drives down from the high ridges and rattles my windows, I hear it again, a phone ringing from somewhere outside. 3 rings. Pause. 3 rings. I moved counties, changed jobs, even smashed my old CB, because I couldn't stand static anymore. But it doesn't matter. The sound finds me. Not every night, not even every week, just enough to keep me from forgetting. I tell myself it's memory, a trick of the brain. But when it happens, my dog lifts her head and stares at the door. The hair on her back rises. I still see that tree line in my dreams, black branches swaying, though no wind moves them. And the sense that if I just stepped closer, the ringing would stop, and I'd finally know who or what had been waiting there. But I never stepped closer, and I never will. I've done power line maintenance out here most of my life, mostly solo work, the kind that sends you down washed out access roads and through hollows where the cell signal hasn't reached yet. The kind of places where silence feels like it's listening. This job came through after a February blizzard rolled down off Klingman's Dome and sheared half the lines west of Bryson City. The main crew tackled the residential lines, but I was sent out to check on a flagged anomaly. An old fishing cabin still pulling voltage, despite no listed occupants and no recent usage on file. Normally, I'd have passed it off as a faulty meter or storm glitch, but the draw was consistent, a low-level hum, steady for days. Someone, or something, was running power out there. The cabin sat along a ridge a few miles off an old forestry service road, near a place folks around here still call War Woman Notch. I had to park and snowshoe the last mile in. The trail was buried in thigh-high powder, slick with crusted ice. Sunlight flickered weakly through the trees, but most of the day felt like late evening. By the time I crested the final slope, I saw the chimney first. Smoke, thin and gray, curling straight up into still air. The cabin was small, maybe 12 by 16. Weathered plank walls, metal roof browned with rust, shutters nailed closed from the inside. The porch sagged under the weight of snow, but I could see light through the cracks. Someone was home. I called out, just once. No answer. I knocked with my gloved hand. Still nothing. But the door creaked open an inch, unlatched. Inside was warm, not just from the stove, but like the place had been lived in. But that made no sense. There was no smell, no firewood, no tobacco, no cooked food, just dry heat and a faint metallic tang, like old wires in warm copper. The stove glowed faintly, embers deep in the belly. A radio sat on the counter, humming static so soft I barely noticed it. No music, no voices, just low static, constant and even. The light above flickered. The bulb was old, Edison style but powered. Dust covered everything, thick on the counter, untouched on the floor. No boot prints, no dishes in the sink, no signs of anyone eating, sitting, or living here. Just the presence of warmth, like it had been prepared. There was a small wooden table against the back wall. A leather-bound journal lay open, its spine broken. Only one page had ink. Don't unplug it, ever. No signature. No date. I don't know what came over me, but I walked outside and found the meter box beside the porch. I flipped the main breaker off. Everything cut instantly. Stove, radio, bulb. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that pushes on your chest. I hiked back 30 yards to my tent and tucked into the sleeping bag early. Snow had started falling again, soft as ash. I left my headlamp on inside the tent, casting a weak yellow glow on the canvas, just until I dozed off. Around 3 a.m., something snapped, not a twig. Fabric. I woke freezing. The tent had collapsed, not snow weight. It had been torn down, poles scattered, my pack unzipped, headlamp missing. No wind, no animal tracks, just the flap swinging open like a mouth. Then I saw it, from the tree line, back toward the cabin. Light. The porch bulb was on again, and the static had returned. I didn't go back to the cabin right away. I sat in the dark, jacket pulled tight, waiting for first light. My backup flashlight was buried at the bottom of the duffel, and I didn't want to move more than I had to. Every time I blinked, I swore I heard that hum from the radio again. Faint, but insistent. When morning came, the snowfall had stopped, but something else had changed. My footprints from the day before. Gone. Covered. Maybe. But the cabin's roof and porch had no new snow. Just my own tent, buried in the white, flattened like a warning. I walked slowly this time. The light inside the cabin was steady, not flickering. Smoke rose from the chimney. Again. Steady. Thin. The front door was ajar. Same as before. Everything inside exactly as I'd left it, or so it seemed at first. Then I saw the journal, still open, but the message had changed. Now it read, "Turn it off again. I dare you." I backed away, slow and careful. It wasn't just that someone had been inside while I slept. It was how clean it all was. No wet boot tracks, no fingerprints on the dust, just the journal page, new and deliberate. I checked the breaker box again, still flipped off, but the cabin was glowing, like nothing had changed. Power still humming, which meant the power wasn't coming from the grid. I should have called it in, but the radio in my truck hadn't worked since I arrived, and my phone was still dead from the cold. All I wanted then was to leave, to be away from that cabin, and whatever game it was playing. I hiked out fast, retracing the snow-covered trail, but halfway down the ridge, I stopped. There was something nailed to a tree trunk, a photograph, printed in dull faded ink, stuck under a rusted nail. It was me, not me yesterday. Me at the cabin standing on the porch. From behind, there were trees in the background. Whoever took it had been watching, and the angle came from within the tree line, not from the trail. I left the generator. I left the tent. I didn't stop until I hit the service road and flapped down a snowplow. That was 3 winters ago. I never logged the visit, never got paid. Sometimes I'd still see low-voltage spots come through the grid from that ridge, just a small steady draw, like something sipping energy every night. But I don't report them anymore. I changed my route. I stick to towns, to homes with porches that creak and dogs that bark and people who answer the door. But I still remember that journal, how the ink looked freshly written, even though the dust never stirred. And sometimes, late at night, when I pass old forestry cabins way off the midline, I hear static, not loud, just a whisper through the trees, like a hum that never really turned off. I took the job on short notice. The Forest Service needed bodies for a month-long trail restoration project on the western edge of the Pisgah, near a place the old maps still call Tulsik. It wasn't a town so much as a scattering of derelict homes, a shuttered feed store, and one squat concrete building marked bunkhouse in fading block letters. The district clerk said it was government issue, like that would make me feel safer sleeping in it. When I pulled in, late October mist was rolling down off the ridges, carrying the smell of wet leaves and diesel. The bunkhouse sat low beside a hollow where a stream once ran. Its cinder block walls were mottled green with damp. The screen door had no spring left, so it swung open like a crooked jaw. Inside was a single corridor with 4 rooms on either side and a communal bathroom at the end. The ceilings were low enough that the overhead fluorescence hummed right above your head. I could smell bleach, but under it something sour, like old sweat baked into fabric. My assigned room had 2 steel bunks bolted to opposite walls, a chipped dresser, and a square mirror over a sink. Government issue everything. The first night passed quietly. I cooked ramen on a hot plate, listened to rain slide down the windows, and drifted off. The second night, after a 10-hour day cutting deadfall off the trail, I stood at the sink shaving under the weak yellow bulb. The mirror was streaked, but enough to make out my own tired face. And then behind my shoulder, a shape. Just a man. Mid-build, dark jacket, standing halfway in the doorway. I turned so fast the razor clattered into the sink. Nothing there. The door hung open to the hall, empty. I chalked it up to exhaustion. Long days, poor light, pareidolia. But as I bent to retrieve the razor, I felt a draft. Not from the hall, from behind me, like the mirror was radiating cool air. By the 4th night, it had happened 3 more times. Always as a reflection. Always when my eyes were on the glass, sometimes closer, once standing almost shoulder to shoulder. When I spun around, the room was empty, except for my own breathing. I draped a towel over the mirror and left it that way, but it didn't help. Lying in the bunk with the towel blocking the glass, I started to hear a faint rhythm, not pipes, not the fridge. Breathing, soft, measured, coming from the wall. When I shifted, it stopped. I told myself it was in my head. The bunkhouse was old. Air moved in strange ways. Pipes ticked, critters nested in cinder block. All explainable. Still, by the end of the week, I found myself shaving outside in the corridor mirror instead. And even then, I caught shapes in the edge of the reflection. Not faces, not clear. Just a suggestion of someone where no one stood. That's when I decided I'd had enough. Saturday night, the others went into town, but I stayed behind. Couldn't face a bar, couldn't face people. The bunkhouse was quiet, except for rain tapping the roof. I stood in my room, towel still draped over the mirror, thinking about packing up and driving back to Asheville before dawn. Then the breathing started again. This time louder, slow inhales, slow exhales. Not muffled, right at the sink. I yanked the towel down. The mirror showed my room as usual, except for one detail. A man was standing in the far corner of the reflection. No face, just a dark outline. Motionless. I turned, empty corner. The reflection still held him. I felt something inside me give way. Weeks of exhaustion, long days, silence, it all snapped at once. I grabbed the mirror with both hands and ripped. The screws tore out of the drywall with a sound like fabric tearing. The glass cracked down the middle, scattering across the tile. Behind it, the wall wasn't painted like the rest. It was raw gypsum, pocked and dark. And in the center, half buried in the drywall, was a small square of paper, a Polaroid. I pulled it free. The edges were cold like it had been sitting against metal. The photo showed my exact room, same sink, same bunk, same chipped dresser, but there was someone standing in the mirror. Not me. Someone taller, shoulders squared, face turned slightly as if looking over their own shoulder at whoever took the picture. The timestamp in the white margin was a faded red, 1997. I don't remember leaving the room. I don't even remember gathering my things. Just the crunch of glass under my boots and the heavy smell of damp drywall and old film chemicals. I slept that night in my truck, engine idling for heat. In the dark, the bunkhouse windows looked like black squares punched into the cinder block. I left at first light, didn't check out, didn't lock the door. It's been almost a year since Talsuk. My contract ended early. I told the supervisor the pipes burst, that the bunkhouse wasn't fit for use. They didn't argue. Now back in my own apartment, I've hung no mirrors. Not in the bathroom, not in the hall. Shaving's a clumsy affair with a metal camping mirror propped on the sink, and I keep it turned face down when I'm done. Because sometimes, even without a mirror, I feel it, not see. Feel like someone standing just behind me, patient as dust. And once on a night, I'd been drinking. I flipped through old trail photos on my phone. One image glitched for a second, a reflection in a window behind me, blurred but tall. I told myself it was my own shadow, but I deleted the photo anyway. Ackley Ridge is the kind of place you only go when you're paid to. A long backbone of shale and scrub pines that rises above the hollows west of Spruce Knob. It catches the worst of winter. When the county road crews say impassable, they're usually talking about Ackley. The weather station up there had been installed in the late 90s. Solar panels, satellite uplink, and a steel-framed cabin the size of a single wide. We used to joke back at the district office in Parsons that it was haunted. Unmanned stations have a way of collecting stories, voices in the feed. Strange readings, missing hikers, all of it good fodder for a beer after work. Then, in mid-January, the feed cut out. No temperature, no wind speed, no precipitation, just blank screens. I was the only one on call with snow experience, so the supervisor handed me a key, a handheld radio, and a warning about ice on the service road. The drive up took 2 hours. The last mile I had to park and hike. Snow hissed under my boots, crust breaking, the air sharp enough to sting my teeth. Fog drifted low across the ridge, turning trees into gray smears. The only sound was my own breathing, and the far-off groan of frozen limbs bending under ice. When I reached the station, I knew something was wrong. Frost clung to the inside of the windows, feathering outward like pale roots. The metal door was crusted with ice around the handle, as though someone had poured water over it. I keyed the lock and pushed. The door opened with a pop, as if breaking a seal. Inside smelled of metal and old paper. The lights were dim. Solar power still fed the batteries, but the air was colder than outside. My breath came out in clouds. The first thing I noticed was the heater, still running. Thermostat cranked high, but the room was like a freezer. The second thing was the wall, on the cinder block, just above the workstation. Someone had scrawled in black marker, "Don't come after me. It's in the snow." The handwriting was shaky, angled downward, as if written in haste. I stepped closer. Dust coated the consoles. Nobody had been cleaning. A coffee mug sat on its side near the floor, frozen ring of liquid beneath it. No footprints, except my own melting into the frost. I booted up the data logs. The last entry wasn't numbers, but an audio file, unscheduled. Time stamped 3 days ago. I hit play. A man's voice, whispering so close to the mic I could hear saliva crackle. "It follows warmth." That was it. No net, no context, just those 3 words. I sat back, listening to the heater hum pointlessly, against the cold. Through the fogged window, the ridge dropped off into pale nothing. My radio sputtered static when I tried to call it in. I turned off the heat. Every instinct told me to leave it running, but my hand moved before I thought. The hum stopped. The silence after was so complete I could hear frost creak on the window frame. I zipped my parka, grabbed my pack, and stepped back outside. The fog had thickened while I was in the station. It rolled across the clearing like a living thing, but slower, patient. Visibility maybe 20 feet. The sound of my boots on snow was the only noise left. Halfway down the trail, I realized I was holding my breath. I didn't look back. The hike down felt longer than the climb up. The fog pressed closer, muting even the crunch of snow. My flashlight beam bounced off white nothing. Every step seemed to echo inside the Paula. I told myself the message on the wall was from some tech who panicked and left. People snap in isolation. They write things. They whisper into mics. It didn't mean anything. But the ridge didn't feel empty. Somewhere off to my left, deeper in the fog, snow shifted. Not a branch falling, too slow, too deliberate, like something stepping just out of sight. I stopped. The sound stopped. The temperature dropped further. My breath froze on my scarf. My fingers ached even through gloves. I remembered the recording. It follows warmth. Without thinking, I shut off my flashlight. The dark was immediate, total. My heart thudded. I waited. The sound came again, a faint, sliding crunch, then stillness. I crouched low, tried to still my breathing. In the dark, the fog tasted metallic like old pennies. After a minute, the noises stopped, only silence and my own pulse. I moved on, slower now, feet finding the packed trail by memory. The grade steepened. Trees loomed out of the what-like pillars. Then I saw it, a set of tracks cutting across mine. Not animal, boots, deep fresh, leading from the ridge toward the drainage below. I followed with my eyes, until they vanished into the fog. The snow around them looked disturbed, but not like melting, more like it had been pushed aside, then closed in. I didn't follow. Another half mile, and the fog began to lift, showing the service road below. My truck sat where I'd left it, a dark shape under frost. The driver's side door was open. I knew I'd locked it. Inside, the cab was empty, nothing taken, but the heater dial was turned all the way up. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine, hands on the wheel, engine idling, breath fogging the windshield. The road ahead dipped into pond shadow. I drove the entire way back to Parsons without the heater on. It's been 8 months since Ackley Ridge. The feed came back online a week later, transmitting normal data, as if nothing had happened. Nobody ever found the tech who left the message on the wall. His personnel file sits in a drawer somewhere. I still work for the service, but only low elevation sites now. I tell the supervisor it's because of my knees, but the truth is I can't stand snow that high, can't stand fog rolling over ridges. Sometimes in late winter, when the sun drops and the temperature falls fast, I swear I see frost feathering on the inside of my truck windows, even with the heat off. And once, just once, parked at a pull-off off Route 33, I left the engine running to keep warm. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw nothing, but the frost on the glass had formed words, faint and slanted, like a finger dragged through ice. It follows warmth. I turned off the ignition and sat there in silence until the glass cleared. I'd been hunting since I was a teenager, but late February in the high hollows above Kobuk Branch felt different. The snow clung to the ridgelines like ash on burned wood, and the air smelled of iron. My cousin Dale had driven down from Virginia for a few days of tracking and quiet. He hadn't been himself lately. Too many long shifts at the plant. A divorce that left him hollow-eyed. But out here, he said he could breathe again. We parked my truck at the mouth of an old logging road. The Forest Service had abandoned it years ago, and the gate hung crooked over a trench of ice. We strapped on packs, slung our rifles, and started up through the brush. Fresh powder blanketed everything. Even the animal paths looked like clean white sheets waiting for someone to write on them. We found what we thought were moose tracks not far from the road. Deep, oval depressions leading off through the laurel thickets toward a saddle ridge. They're big, Dale muttered. Squatting down, steam rose from his breath. Fresh too. We followed them. The prints wound between poplars crusted with frost. past a collapsed firewood shed, and up toward higher ground. The only sound was our boots compressing snow and the slow tick of ice falling from branches. After an hour, the ridge leveled. The tracks looked stranger now, less like moose, more like boots, long, evenly spaced, no drag between steps, and only going forward. I crouched and brushed powder from one depression. It was narrow at the heel, wider at the toe. "These aren't hooves," I said. Dale's face tightened. "Maybe someone's up here. Snowshoers." But there were no pole marks, no return path, just a single file of prints heading north. We kept on, slower now. The forest changed as we climbed, trees shorter, branches black with ice. We passed an old hunting blind with its ladder half rotted off. Inside was nothing but a rusted thermos and mouse droppings. The prints skirted it without pause. Then, at a frozen creek, the tracks stopped. Not turned, not doubled back, just ended at the edge of the ice, like the person had stepped onto the creek and vanished. We stood there, our breath clouding. The stream beneath the ice gurgled faintly, muffled by snow. Dale looked around. "Where'd they go?" That's when I noticed something else. Our own tracks, the ones we'd been making for the past hour, were gone. I turned a full circle. All around us, the snow lay unbroken, smooth as a blank page. Only the line of mysterious prints remained, ending at the creek. "We came from there," I said, pointing down slope, "right there." But there was nothing, no sign of us ever arriving. Dale's face went pale. "I don't like this," he said. A breeze shifted through the hollow, carrying the faint smell of rot, like wet leaves packed under ice. Beyond the creek, fog was rolling in from the north, low and slow. Somewhere in that fog, a branch creaked, or maybe a footstep. We didn't speak again. We just started walking, trying to retrace our path, though there was no path left. The sound of the creek faded behind us. The fog thickened until the trees turned to shadows. I remember thinking, if we stop, we'll disappear too. We walked for what felt like hours. The fog pressed close, muting every sound except our own breaths. Even the snow beneath our boots sounded different, softer, like stepping into flour. I kept glancing to my left. Nothing visible, but a sense of weight moving with us, just beyond sight. A pressure, like being on stage when someone is standing in the wings. Dale's head kept jerking, as if he'd heard something behind him. We tried using the compass. The needle drifted slow, then spun, then stopped dead. Useless. Dale muttered, "It's like we're walking in circles." I didn't answer. The fog was denser now, so thick the trees only appeared a few feet ahead. When they did, their trunks looked warped, darker at the base as if soaked. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wet iron and cold blood. I decided to mark a tree with my knife. When we came to the next one, I carved again. 10 minutes later, we passed a tree with the same mark, my mark. But the snow around it was undisturbed. That's when Dale started talking less and less. His eyes had that faraway look, as if listening for something deeper than the woods. Finally, we stumbled onto a break in the trees, a narrow power line cut, poles leaning like tired men. In the distance, maybe a quarter mile, I saw the faint glint of asphalt. A road. We half slid down the embankment, boots slipping on crust. The fog thinned just enough for the shape of my truck to appear on the shoulder like a ship through mist. We'd made it back, but Dale just stood at the edge of the tree line, staring. "Come on," I said. My voice cracked. He didn't move. I went to him, grabbed his arm, and led him the last few yards. His hands were cold and stiff as wood. We climbed into the truck and I started the engine. The heater blew lukewarm air. We didn't speak, not on the drive back to town, not that night in the motel, not the next morning. Dale hasn't said a word about that day since. He barely hunts anymore. His eyes slunk away. If I mention snow. It's been 3 winters. I still go out sometimes, but never above the ridges. Never in late February. I've thought about what happened. Whiteouts can play tricks. Snow can erase tracks. Fog can confuse direction. That's what I tell myself. But every so often, when the world goes quiet during a snowfall, I hear footsteps matching mine, just out of sync, not crunching, gliding. And sometimes, in fresh snow, I look back and see nothing at all. No prints, not even mine. I keep walking anyway, because stopping feels worse, and I never go near frozen creeks. In the spring of 2019, I was part of a small census verification team working in the interior sections of the Appalachian Range, mainly through West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. It was boring work on paper: knock on doors, verify addresses, note who lived there. But the terrain made everything harder. Steep grades, muddy hollers, winding roads that didn't match any GPS line. Most of the towns we hit were barely towns anymore. Just a few trailers, maybe a church and a post office with more dust than mail. But there was one dot on our old laminated field map that had caught my attention more than once. Steeple Hollow. No one had logged it in over a decade. No census data since 2007. Not marked inactive, not struck through, just there, unvisited. When I brought it up to my partner Dana, she pulled out her own sheet and squinted. "We've got time before dark. Let's take a look." We took the Jeep up from a forestry road that hadn't seen traffic in months. Ruts deep enough to jar your teeth loose, mud flinging against the wheel wells, brush clawing at the side mirrors. After 5 miles, the trees opened up, and we rolled into what had once been a town. Old buildings lined the road: general store, chapel, a few shotgun houses, all slumped or half-rotted, but strangely clean. Not pristine, but not forgotten either. The windows were intact. No graffiti, no vines overtaking porches. There was no trash, no beer cans, not even a squirrel. Just stillness. The air was damp and heavy, and the fog hung low like a dropped ceiling. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. I stepped out. The gravel under my boots was loose but freshly turned. I could smell cold earth and moss, but also wood polish. Something artificial. Dana pointed. Over there, a school bus parked beside the chapel, bright yellow, unfaded paint, tires clean. The kind of shine you don't see past the first week of the school year. We approached slowly. The doors were open. A thin crackling sound came from inside. I climbed the steps first. No one. No driver. No kids. But all the seats were occupied. Not by people, but by boots. Rows and rows of children's boots, lined up neatly on every seat. Small ones, worn but clean. Some mismatched pairs, all sizes, all colors, as if their owners had taken them off and climbed out barefoot. Dana stepped in behind me. Her breath hitched. No mud, no prints, no sign of movement. Just that crackling sound. The bus radio, hissing static, just faint enough to make you lean in. Then it spoke, in a childlike sing-song voice. Next stop, nowhere. Nothing else. I turned the radio off, but the silence that followed felt worse. We left the bus without speaking. The air had shifted, cooler, somehow heavier. Fog thickened at the edges of the clearing, like the trees had moved closer. I marked the coordinates on my clipboard and snapped a few photos, though my hands trembled. Dana kept glancing over her shoulder, lips pressed tight. "Let's just finish the sweep," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We walked the rest of the town on foot. Porches that didn't creak. Mailboxes without names. A playground where the swings hung perfectly still, though there was enough wind to move our hair. One house had light inside. Not on, but a lantern glow, flickering behind thin curtains. When we knocked, there was no answer. The doorknob turned but didn't budge. Locked. A child's drawing was taped to the inside of the glass, crayon on faded paper. A yellow bus in a field, drawn with a shaky hand. The kids had no faces, just circles where heads should have been. Dana was the first to say it out loud. "We should go." We hiked back toward the Jeep, but the road behind us looked different, less traveled than before, as if the ruts had filled in. I turned around and looked at the bus. It was gone. Just an empty clearing where it had been. No tracks, no indentations in the gravel, as if it had never existed. We got in the Jeep and didn't speak the whole way down. The forest pressed in close to the road, branches brushing the windows like reaching fingers. We filed a field report back at base, told them the location was structurally intact, but uninhabited. We left out the boots, the voice, the bus. No one asked questions. Steeple Hollow was marked inactive. After that, Dana left the job a week later. I haven't spoken to her since, but something about that place stayed with me. It wasn't the emptiness, it was how maintained it felt, like someone was still taking care of it. And every once in a while, usually around dusk, I'll hear a faint voice through the static on my car radio. A childlike cadence, always the same phrase. Next stop, nowhere. I've turned the radio off, I've replaced it, but the voice always finds its way back. And sometimes, only sometimes, I find flecks of yellow paint on my tires. I don't stop to look anymore. I just keep going. I booked the cabin because it was cheap, remote, and off-grid. 3 things I was actively looking for. After years of shooting wildlife photos in more popular parts of the Blue Ridge, I wanted to get deeper into the southern Appalachian backcountry, where the ridges roll on for miles and cell service drops out. The listing called it a restored dry cabin near a town named Millstone Gap. Just a scattering of houses, an abandoned sawmill, and a gas station with one working pump. No electricity, no plumbing. Solar lights and a hand pump for water. No distractions. The drive-in took most of the afternoon. The last 10 miles were Forest Service road. Narrow switchbacks, frost-heaved ruts, and a canopy of black pine overhead. Rain had started before noon, and now hung in the air as mist. Everything smelled of wet earth and iron. I found the turnoff by a faded sign nailed to a poplar. Cabin. The driveway was little more than 2 tire tracks into laurel thickets. By the time I parked, the drizzle had thickened into a slow, cold rain. The cabin itself sat low against the slope, a single-room structure with a tin roof and a porch sagging under moss. The logs were dark with age, chinked with something that looked like gray mortar. No power lines, no neighbors, just trees closing in and a stream somewhere below. Inside smelled of damp wood and cold ashes. A cot in one corner, a small wood stove with soot streaks, and a shelf of old guidebooks. On the table sat a guest book, the kind you find in family cabins, spiral-bound, cloth cover, welcome guests, stamped in gold. I opened it out of habit. The first pages were what you'd expect, neat notes from hikers and birders, people thanking the owners, dated signatures. But as I flipped ahead, the handwriting changed. In between the polite entries, someone had scrawled strange, hurried lines. Saw her again in the window. 3 knocks =, bet sign. Don't answer the radio. Then nothing after 2019. The last note before the blank pages simply read, "Leaving early, can't take it anymore." I ran my fingers over the indentation of the words. Whoever wrote them had pressed hard. On a shelf above the wood stove sat an old CB radio, dust-coated, mic coiled like a sleeping snake. Its dial was off, but a tiny green light glowed faintly. I unplugged it, but the light stayed on. I told myself it was residual charge. I was tired, wet hungry. I spent the evening sorting gear, checking my cameras, boiling water on the stove. By nightfall, the rain had turned to sleet, pinging softly on the roof. No cell service, just the hiss of my own breathing and the occasional creak of the walls cooling. Lying on the cot, I could see my reflection faintly in the window, or thought I could. The glass distorted, made things look taller, stretched. Once, when I sat up, I thought I saw another silhouette behind mine, but when I turned the window only showed trees. I closed the curtain and tried to sleep. That's when the static began. Soft at first, like a whisper of sentience in the air, then louder, a low hiss. I sat up. It was coming from the CB radio. I unplugged it again. The hiss continued. Then faint but distinct, my name. spoken like someone testing it out for the first time. I froze. I reached for the guest book to write down what had just happened, maybe as a joke, maybe as a warning. But when I opened to the next blank page, my pen hovered over words already there. My name, my date, my handwriting. I hadn't written it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the table with my coat still on, staring at the CB radio. The hiss had faded, but the green light pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Outside, the sleet had turned back to dripping from the eaves in steady beats. At dawn, the forest was wrapped in fog. Everything felt muted. The window glass beaded with condensation, but a clear circle had formed at head height, like someone had stood breathing on it from the outside. I packed my cameras and shouldered my bag. My plan was simple: hike out, leave the key under the rock where I found it, and draw it back to Millstone Gap. When I stepped onto the porch, the mud showed no prints. Not mine from yesterday, not anyone else's, just smooth, packed soil. Halfway down the track to the road, I stopped. The fog was thicker than I'd ever seen, hanging like wet cloth between the trees. No birds, no stream sound. I turned back. Through the gray, the cabin was barely a shadow. The curtain in the window had been drawn aside. I hadn't left it that way. I forced myself back inside, telling myself I'd forgotten something. The air inside was warmer now. Though the stove was cold, the guest book still lay open on the table. My entry, the one I hadn't written, had changed. Under my name, someone had added, in the same handwriting, 3 knocks tonight. Don't open. My skin went cold. I closed the book and backed out. I made it as far as the bend where the laurel closes over the track. That's when I heard it. A dull knock from the direction of the cabin. 3 beats, slow, not woodpecker, knock birch, knuckles on wood. I didn't turn around. I walked faster, then faster still, until I broke into a run. My breath burned. The fog ahead was so dense it felt solid. When I finally stumbled out onto the Forest Service road, the rain had stopped. The world looked normal again. Pale sky, slick gravel, my Jeep waiting where I'd left it. The cabin's track behind me was gone. Just a wall of laurel. It's been almost a year since Millstone Gap. The owner of the cabin never answered my emails. The listing vanished a month later. I still have the photos from that trip. Moss on old timbers, deer tracks in mud, a ruined barn on a ridge, all normal. But in one frame, a window of the cabin reflects a figure standing behind me, tall and indistinct. I shave without mirrors now. I keep the radio in my truck switched off, and sometimes, late at night, I'll hear faint static from the corner of the room. When I look, nothing's there. But on my desk, the guest book I never took sits closed, and I haven't opened it. When you sign on for winter emergency service work in the mountains, you're mostly just signing on for boredom and cold. In 2021, I took a 2-month contract in a micro town called Grinnell's Point, tucked into a narrow hollow between 2 ridges in the southern Appalachians. Population maybe 50, if you counted dogs. The nearest real hospital was 40 minutes away, so the town kept a 2-bay fire hall and 1 battered ambulance. The building had been pieced together over decades. Concrete block on the first floor, clapboard upstairs, a rusting bell tower bolted to one corner like an afterthought. According to the old-timers, the bell had been used back in the 1940s to summon volunteers before they had radios. Now it was just a landmark, its ladder padlocked and wrapped in chain, snow drifting through the slats of the upper windows. I bunked there on night shifts, sleeping on a cot in the small dorm room above the bays. The place smelled of damp canvas, diesel, and old wood smoke. Pipes knocked when the boiler kicked in. Mice skittered behind the walls. I learned the town's rhythms fast. Calls were rare, an elderly slip and fall, a small chimney fire. Most nights were just paperwork and weather updates, the hiss of the scanner fading into static. And then there was the bell. Every night, right around 2 a.m., it would clang once, only once. Not a gust rattling the metal, Not ice falling. A single, deliberate strike. The first time I thought I'd imagined it. The second time, I checked the tower door. Still chained, still padlocked. No footprints in the snow. By the fifth night, it had become a clock in my head. I'd wake just before waiting. The clang would echo down through the bays, rattling the glass in the office windows. Then silence again. I started staying up to see who was messing with it. On a Monday, in late January, snow had been falling since dusk. Big wet flakes, no wind. The town was dark, just a few porch lights glowing faintly. I killed the bay lights and sat by the upstairs window with a thermos of coffee, watching the bell tower. At 2:02, through the falling snow, I saw a shape in the tower, a person, standing just behind the slats, motionless. I blinked hard, leaned closer. The outline didn't move. The bell gave a single heavy clang. I bolted downstairs. My boots left deep prints in the snow as I ran to the tower door, still chained. Padlock frozen. No other access. I shined my light up through the slats. Empty, just drifting snow. My own prints led from the hall to the tower. Nothing else disturbed the surface. Back inside, the dorm room felt colder. The pipes hissed like someone whispering behind them. I shut the blinds and sat on my bunk until dawn. That morning, when I pulled back the blanket, there was a faint gray line of ash drawn across the sheet where my torso had been. Not spilled, drawn. Straight as a ruler, I brushed it away with shaking hands. The smell of cold wood smoke clung to my fingers. I didn't tell anyone. I stayed on 2 more weeks. Calls came and went, but the bell kept striking at 2 a.m., and the figure kept appearing, always just a shape behind the slats. I tried logic, checked for loose boards, pigeons, pranksters. Nothing. The snow outside stayed pristine, except for my own prints. By February, sleep was a rumor. I'd lie on the cot staring at the ceiling, waiting. The ash lines kept returning. First one across my bunk, then 2, then 3. Always faint, as if placed with fingertips dipped in soot. I started keeping my gear packed, boots laced, ready to go. One night, heavy snow muffled even the scanner's hiss. At 1:45 a.m. Unable to stand it, I went down to the bays and unlocked the ambulance to warm up. The garage smelled of rubber and salt, of hoses stiff with cold. The clang came at 2 o'clock sharp. Through the windshield, I saw the shape again in the tower. This time, though, a faint glow flickered behind it, like lantern light. I opened the bed door and stepped out. Snow swallowed my boots to the ankle. My breath came out in hard white bursts. No wind, no sound except my own steps. I circled to the tower door, still chained. I put my gloved hands on the metal. I spit through. Above me, something shifted. A flake of soot drifted down, landing on my sleeve. When I looked back up, the shape was gone. The glow too. I returned inside, heart hammering. Upstairs, the dorm room smelled strongly of ash, as if a fire had just burned out. My blanket was folded back neatly. Across the sheet, 5 thin lines of ash had been drawn where my body would have lain. That was the night I quit. It's been 2 winters since Grinnell's Point. I never filed a report, never went back. The contract ended, and I left before sunrise, driving down switchbacks slick with black ice, my duffel runs rattling in the passenger seat. Now back home, I still work but only in towns with no bell towers, no empty upper rooms. I've stopped burning wood in my stove. The smell of ash makes my hands shake. Some nights, especially in February, when the snow is wet and heavy, I'll wake at 2 a.m. for no reason. The house is silent, and yet just at the edge of hearing, I'll imagine a single clang echoing down an empty hall. Once, half asleep, I brushed my palm across the sheet and felt grit there. When I flicked on the lens, it was gone. I don't tell anyone about Grinnell's Point. Not my co-worker, not my family. But when I close my eyes, I still see that tower, the chain lens, the falling snow, and the shape standing perfectly still behind the slats. And I always wake just before the bell. I was hired as part of a small renovation crew restoring an old schoolhouse in the Appalachian foothills, northwest edge of Clay County, West Virginia. The place was built sometime in the 1920s and hadn't been used since the late 70s, when the town finally consolidated. The plan was to turn it into a local museum, showcase old photographs, Civil War relics, coal tools, maybe a few desks and typewriters. Most of the crew was local. I wasn't. I came in from Charleston, freelance carpenter, didn't ask questions, just needed steady work. The school sat at the bottom of a hollow, tucked against a wall of trees so thick you couldn't see the sun past 4 p.m. The siding had long since grayed. Vines clawed the chimney. A rusted bell tower leaned like a broken shoulder. Inside it was all dust and rot, buckled floors, water stains down every wall. The smell of mold layered beneath the sharper stink of mouse droppings and wet plaster. We started upstairs, roof patches, window frames, gutting the old science lab. Nothing strange, not until we started clearing out the old boiler room in the basement. That room had been sealed with plywood and old screws rusted into metal. When we pulled the boards off, the air behind it came out stale and bitter. The smell of mildew and something older like rust and vinegar. While chipping up the floor near one of the support beams, one of the guys, Wendell, hit something hard and hollow. Turned out to be a steel hatch, flush with the concrete. There was no handle, just a ring embedded deep, worn smooth like it had been pulled many times. We pried it open. Below it was a narrow concrete shaft with a rotted ladder leading into darkness. No one wanted to climb down, so naturally I volunteered. The tunnel was barely wide enough to walk through without turning sideways. The air down there was dry, too dry, like a vacuum. No smell, no temperature. My boots echoed too long with each step. It opened into a chamber, maybe 15 by 15 feet, entirely concrete. There were old school desks stacked in the corner, small ones, rusted shut, legs bent like spider limbs. A few wooden toys, a cracked spinning top, a doll missing its eyes. Along the far wall were chalkboards, 3 of them, covered in spirals, some overlapping, some concentric, crudely drawn teeth, and names. Names scratched in so violently the chalk had gouged the board beneath. Some were just first names: Matthew, Lacey, Jonah. Others were struck through, crossed out again and again. I backed out, slowly, didn't say much when I came up, just told the foreman there was a crawl space, maybe storage. But that night, I kept thinking about the drawings, not childish, exactly, just angry, unsettled, like whoever made them wanted them to stay buried. The foreman had the tunnel sealed again within 2 days, welded the hatch shut, said it wasn't up to code, and we didn't have time to mess with side projects. But I couldn't let it go. The air down there, it was wrong. It didn't feel forgotten. It felt waiting. That week, more strange things happened. One morning, the chalk lines we'd used upstairs to measure trim had been wiped away. In their place were spirals drawn in carpenter's pencil, dark and clumsy. We thought it was a joke. Wendell swore it wasn't him. Another day, the old attendance roster we kept on the whiteboard, who was on shift, who wasn't, had been erased. In its place were names. The same names I saw scratched on the chalkboards, written in a different hand. Not block letters like we used, thin, tight cursive. And it kept happening. Every time we rewrote the roster, it would get wiped, and the names would come back. Always the same: Matthew, Lacey, Jonah. At first I thought maybe I'd imagined them on the wall. Maybe the names had gotten stuck in my head. But when I asked Wendell about it, he went quiet. Said, I saw them too. Said he hadn't slept right since. One night, I stayed late, patching a support beam alone. The others had gone. Snow was starting to fall outside, sticking to the windows in thick clumps. I worked with my headphones in, but kept pausing to check behind me. There was this feeling like being watched, not the kind that makes you look behind a curtain, the kind that makes you look up. I pulled my headphones out. That's when I heard it, humming, soft, simple, a lullaby, maybe, or just a rhythm. It echoed faintly through the floorboards. I followed it. Down to the basement. The boiler room was cold, colder than outside, and silent. Now. But I swear the hatch, the steel that had been welded shut, it looked like it had been pulled on. The ring was out, sitting straight up. I didn't touch it. I didn't go near it. Just turned around and left. I never came back after that night. They finished the museum without me. Grand opening happened in the spring. I didn't go, but Wendell called me a few months later. He said someone donated old class records to the museum, yearbooks, photos, ledgers, from before the school closed in the 70s. In the back of one binder was a disciplinary file, a handful of students listed as removed from regular instruction. No explanation, no parents on file. The names were all there. Matthew, Lacey, Jonah. No last names, just the first. They matched the ones on the wall, the ones on the whiteboard. The museum displays don't mention that part. There's no sign of the tunnel anymore. But when I search the museum's new website, it sometimes takes a second to load, and on one visit, late at night, when I hit the staff and contributors page, it flickered for a second and showed a different list. 3 names, written in thin, tight cursive, and mine was at the bottom. I never clicked it again, and I've stopped answering calls from Clay County. I was cutting along the coastal edge of the southern Appalachians, following a narrow state route that twisted through fog-soaked hills and pine valleys, trying to make it to Asheville by nightfall. My truck, a 2002 Tacoma that had never let me down, started sputtering around mile marker 63. The check engine light blinked twice, then the whole thing gave out near a wide pull-off, just past a faded green sign. Drellick Bay. Pop. 38. The ocean was maybe 15 miles east, but here it felt landlocked. Dense forest closing in behind the town. Salt air faint but present. I called for a tow, but got nothing. No signal. So I walked. The road curved around a short bluff, then dipped into the hollow where Drellick Bay sat like it had been forgotten mid-century. The first thing I passed was an old church, with warped shutters and vines reaching halfway up the bell tower. Then came the diner. One woman inside, blonde, middle-aged, wearing an apron, and reading a newspaper behind the counter. She didn't look up. 2 blocks later, I saw a man sweeping the steps of a building marked Town Clinic. That was it. The rest of the houses and buildings had signs of life, curtains drawn, trash bins out, but no movement, no conversation, no barking dogs or distant TVs, just a silent little town under a gray sky. The only place that seemed open was the sheriff's office. He looked like he'd been waiting for me. White mustache, round gut, chewing on a toothpick. Truck won't run, I told him. He didn't ask for details, just nodded and said, "You'll stay one night." Not should, not can, just will. He called for a tow. A truck came 20 minutes later, driven by no one I'd seen walking around town. They didn't say anything, just hooked my Tacoma and pulled off. The sheriff handed me a key. Motels at the end of Maine. I started to ask if they had vacancy, but when I looked at the tag, my name was already written on it, in pen, neat handwriting. The motel was 2 stories, faded siding, no cars in the lot. The office door was locked, nobody at the desk, but the key worked. Room 3, smelled faintly of bleach and wet carpet. 1 bed, lamp that didn't work, shower with rusted nozzles. On the desk was a Drellick Bay welcome brochure, old, curled at the edges. On the back, handwritten in the same pen, "Check out sunrise." That night, I walked to the diner. The same woman was still behind the counter. The only difference was the lighting, dim to yellow. She poured me coffee before I asked. The food came 5 minutes later. I hadn't ordered. 2 kids sat in the back booth, faces pale, eyes too wide. They didn't speak, just stared at me like they were trying to remember something. Back in the motel, I laid in bed listening for signs of life. Nothing. No road noise, No night animals. I closed my eyes around 1 a.m. When I woke at dawn, the key was gone, but my truck was parked outside, clean, full tank, running. I didn't check out. I didn't say goodbye. I drove until the hills turned familiar again. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't want to explain it. But a week later, my friend Jake, big into genealogy and weird local history, sent me a message. Thought this was funny. You got a twin. Look close. Attached was a scanned clipping from the Drellick Bay Herald, Centennial Edition, 1931. Black and white photo, lined up townsfolk, 38 people, and one of them was me. I stared at the photo so long the screen dimmed. Blurry, grainy, but unmistakable. Same hairline, same jaw, same expression I've seen in my bathroom mirror every morning since I was 20. I called Jake, asked him where he got it. Online archive. They're digitizing old papers. Some intern at the Historical Society. I asked if he'd read anything else about the town. Not much out there. Bit of flooding in the 60s. Minor fire in 85. Place basically disappeared from records after that. Still says population 38, I said. He laughed. Creepy detail, huh? But something about that number. It wasn't just a count. It felt like a limit. A rule. I went back. I know how that sounds, but I needed to see if it was real. If I'd just lost my mind for a night. It took a few hours to find the same state route, but there was no mile marker 63. No turnoff. No Drellick Bay. I drove for 5 hours. Found nothing. No coastal town. No rusted sign. No narrow bluff. Eventually I pulled into a ranger station near the park boundary and asked if they knew the area. One of the older rangers leaned forward. You said Drellick Bay. I nodded. He looked at the others, then shrugged. That place hasn't existed since the 30s. Whole area's underwater now. Dam project in 42. Relocated the remaining folks. Most of them disappeared off the map. He showed me an old topographical map with elevation lines drawn like scars. Where the town had been was now marked as reservoir catchment area. But that's not the part that stuck with me. The ranger asked, "Why'd you say you were there?" I broke down. Stayed one night. He frowned. They never had a motel. Not back then. That night, I dug out the motel brochure. I'd stuffed it in the glove box. Thought maybe I imagined it. But there it was. Same curled paper. Same little red stamp. Drellick Bay. Guest suites. Check out sunrise. On the back, someone had circled the 8 and 38 repeatedly. Pressed hard enough the ink bled through. I don't talk about it much. Just enough to feel like I didn't hallucinate the whole thing. But I've noticed something since. My phone sometimes shows no service. Drellick Bay area. When I'm up in the mountains. Just for a second. Then it flickers away. And last month, Jake sent me another photo. Different paper. Grayson County Sentinel. Headline. Drellick Bay Centennial, 2031. A town that refused to die. Updated photo. 38 faces. And this time, I wasn't the only repeat. Jake's face was there too.